Hi, Daniel. What a wonderful pleasure to have you on the Teacher's Point of View podcast this morning. Well, afternoon for you. I know, obviously, you've been really busy, sort of recruiting for January, and so I really appreciate you kind of taking out the time and having a conversation with me about your journey. I mean, you've obviously done it all, haven't you? You've travelled the world, and you're originally from Canada. Now you're in Asia, teaching out there. Could you just kind of introduce yourself, Dan, and kind of your experiences in teaching and what made you get into it?
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm originally from small town Canada. Like I say, I came from a town of 200 people. So when I do go home and, knowing that I've lived on several continents, it is kind of strange for the people around. Got interested in teaching from a really young age. My mom still has it framed with this little piece I wrote when I was in third grade about how I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up. Probably due to the fact that most of my, other than my family, most of the role models that I follow, I just was lucky enough to have some fabulous teachers when I was young, and something I wanted to continue. So I went to school, I went to university, and I graduated with a physical education teaching qualification. After that, that kind of leads into why I went overseas, because Canada was really, it was a struggle to get jobs when I graduated. The teaching market was pretty flooded. So I decided to go overseas, and I'm so glad that, those forced opportunities were put my way, because that launched my career.
Yeah, awesome. So where have you traveled to? I mean, obviously you started in Canada, but what was your first move? Like, what school did you kind of go for, and what made you go for that opportunity?
Yeah, so I landed in Japan in 1994. So a long time ago, I ended up in Japan. I was actually teaching. I came over because I didn't know about international schools at that time. So I came over, I just wanted a little bit of adventure. And so I came over to actually teach English. And then suddenly there was an advertisement in the local English newspaper called the Japan Times for a PE teacher at what was called St. Maur International School in Yokohama. I applied. There weren't very many qualified PE teachers in the country at the time. So I ended up getting the job. And that was the start of my career. Then I had an opportunity to move literally across the road over to Yokohama International School. And that's where I actually got really excited about leadership, because the head of school at the time, Neil Richards, Mr. Charisma. And I thought, gosh, I want to be like that guy someday, because, he was just one of those people you could sit and talk to for hours. So, I went over to Yokohama International School. I was there for a decade. That's where I really got, like I said, and Neil was such a great guy as being a mentor. He's, I know you want to be in leadership. I think you've got the qualities to be a leader. So he afforded me lots of different opportunities. So I actually went as a PE teacher, and then I became the head of department. And then I actually became the curriculum coordinator for IGCSE we were running at the time. And then an opportunity came up to be activities director. So I took that. So I got a lot of chances to have a lot of different leadership opportunities. That in turn led to the opportunity. There was a principal job in Hokkaido, which is the northern part of Japan. So I took that job as my first senior leadership position. Went up there for 3 years, and probably wouldn't have left Japan. I love Japan, actually, but your children are your children. And my son, being Canadian, my son was playing ice hockey here in Japan. He kind of outgrew Japanese ice hockey, and he wanted to pursue that later on and into university. So we moved actually to the United States. We were looking in North America and Europe. A fabulous school in the United States came up. It was called the International School of Indiana, which, most people go, like, there's an international school right in the middle of, the Midwest in the United States. But it was started by Lilly Pharmaceutical. Lilly is one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, and they wanted to bring in foreign researchers. So they had so there's a school that has like 56 nationalities right in the heartland of the United States. And then an opportunity came up in Switzerland, and my wife had actually gone to Switzerland kind of right after her university years and spent a couple of years there. And when the opportunity came up in Switzerland, she's like, we're going. So we went. And then we're there for a couple of years. I worked in corporate education, which was fantastic. It taught me a lot, and it taught me I don't want to be in corporate education was one of the other things, but it did teach me, I think, leading into a headship about how to run a school as a business, because, our international school, private schools are a business. So that gave me a better business sense. And then Tokyo International School had an opening. I knew the school, I knew people there. And when I applied, I ended up getting that job. So that's where I am today.
Yeah, fantastic. Obviously Switzerland. I mean, you said corporate education. Like, what does that mean?
It means that it's an own school, and one of the, I don't think many people will admit it, but one of the aims of a corporate education is to make a profit. And education, trying to make a profit and mixing that with education is not usually a very good recipe for success. So yeah, everything was put through a lens of, if it doesn't make profit, we probably shouldn't do it that way, as opposed to, if it's not educationally sound, we shouldn't do it that way. So I went back into nonprofit education, which is literally based on, what's best for kids, as opposed to let's make sure we're making a little bit of money here.
Yeah, fantastic. What do you think, like, traveling the world and teaching in different countries really done for you in your career?
I think it's just opened my eye. I mean, coming from, like I said, my beginnings are really interesting because I come from, a rural place in Canada, 200 people. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody looks the same. I go off into international school, and oh my gosh, there's 65 nationalities at my current school. I think it just opened my eyes to what how fantastic the world can actually be. And my son actually just came in from university because they've decided to go online for the whole year. And we were talking about, we were actually had this exact same topic. We were talking about, he says how lucky he feels to have grown up in international schools, because when he talks to the local kids in university, they just, he actually, if it's not nice to say, but he said, I feel sorry for them because they just really haven't had the experiences I have, getting to know people from all over the world. So.
Yeah, I mean, what about international schools in particular then? Because they are very different to normal state schools, aren't they? What do you think the biggest differences are?
I think people have asked me that a lot, and why. I mean, I was offered jobs to come back to Canada to teach, and I think one of the things that's obviously different is that you do have you get to have a blend of the best, is what I like to say. So we're not bound by national curriculum, which can be really hand tying. If we feel like, for our PE curriculum, we use an Australian curriculum. For our maths curriculum, we use something. I mean, even though we're an international baccalaureate school, we can pull from all over the world. So we use everyone's expertise and we kind of pick from the best. And I think that's one of the great things as a learning perspective for kids. We really do go out there and try to find the best situation that we think that's going to help kids be successful. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that what I mean, it's kind of interesting. People always ask me, and it's a crazy thing to say, but I've been in international education for over 25 years now, and I've literally never broken up a fight. And people say, well, what do you mean? And I said, the kids just get along so great because nothing is normal. You know what I mean? Everybody's different. Everybody does things in different ways. So everyone and there's such an acceptance in international schools that there's no normal or there's no correct way of doing things. So if someone does something a little bit different, nobody gets bothered by it. Where back when I was in Canada, if you were a little different and you did something different or you acted a little differently, you stood out and you had problems. That doesn't happen in international ed.
Yeah, I mean, the first point that you made was about kind of having your hands tied with the curriculum. Sorry, not having them tied. And you know what? It's quite remarkable because obviously a lot of UK educators that I've spoken to, and they sometimes feel like their hands are tied with the curriculum, because and they feel sometimes they don't always get the best out of their kids because their hands are tied with the curriculum because the government want them to do it in a particular way, or they have expectations. But I mean, how effective do you think that is for you and your students? Like, do you feel that you have the flexibility to tailor it to the students more effectively, like on an individual basis?
Oh, 100%. And I listen, like I said, I've been listening to your podcast since you asked me to come on. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I really like it. And so I listened to it on the train. And I think one of the themes that I hear coming out in a lot of the podcasts is that, we have these people at the government level who are setting education and setting education standards, and their only qualification was they went to school. They don't have a background in education. They really don't understand, what makes sound good education. So that they have the ability to make all these decisions around education just absolutely blows my mind. And we don't have that. And that's one of the things I love about international schools in particular, because, we have our own board of and I'm lucky at my current school because we have some educators on our board but literally all of our discussions come around to what is going to be best for student learning, and nothing else. I mean, conversations don't revolve around anything else. It's all about student learning and what's going to be best for student learning. And like I said, and we can just pull from the world, and we do follow the International Baccalaureate curriculum, but we make the IB is a fantastic program. Again, I've been with it for 20 some years. If I didn't like it, I would have left it. But I think what I love about the IB as well is that you can tailor it to your school. It's not a one size fits all. You take the philosophies from it, but then you build within it. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really different, isn't it? And yeah, thanks for obviously watching the podcast, though. it's not,
no. Yeah, and I'm not doing it just to make you feel. I mean, I literally started. I thought I initially started to listen. I thought, okay, what am I getting myself into? And then after I started listening to the first one or two, I'm like, oh, this is really interesting stuff. I really want to hear what other people are doing in other parts of the world. So, and you always pick up a nugget every time I listen to a podcast, I always pick up something. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I can use that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so I mean, what about in Japan then? Like, do you have an education secretary similar to the one in the UK? I mean, is it completely left to educators personally, or how does it work in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, we have what's called school status in Japan, but we're not. There's school status, which means they recognize us as a school, but we're not what's considered what would be called an Article 1 school, where we're governed by the education authority. So, even when the COVID things come out, I know we're going to talk about that later, the Ministry of Education would say, Japanese schools, Article 1, you need to do it this way. All of you, they're called gakko hojin, or school status schools, you should do it this way, but if you feel like you don't want to, you don't have to. So we have some guidance and they give advice, but they're not top down towards us, which is fantastic. So yeah, and we're obviously very, very different than the Japanese system. I mean, Japanese system is far more traditional. We're obviously not traditional at all. I would say, we're way out there on the non-traditional side of things. So when you think about how old school education, so.
Okay. I mean, so when you say traditional, do you mean like they're standing at the front of the classroom, like with writing things on the board? I mean, you've obviously got interactive whiteboards and stuff. Is that the kind of main difference?
Yeah, that and it's the old idea of regurgitation of facts, right? I mean, I remember when I went to school, you had to remember, you had to remember when Columbus sailed across the ocean and got to North America. And those, the remembrance of all those facts where, education has changed a lot, and it's a lot more about critical thinking. It'd be more like, well, why did Columbus bother doing that in the first place? And, what did he gain out of it? As opposed to just remembering the facts, there would be interesting information around, and you would have, I think one of the things that's very different about our education is when I walk into a classroom at our school, for example, I always say, so what are you learning, guys? And they'll tell me. I say, well, why are you learning that? And they'll tell me why they're learning it. And they say, well, how are you actually learning that? And they'll explain that. And if students can explain the what, the how, and the why they're learning something, that to me is true education, as opposed to just remembering a bunch of facts and regurgitating them down on a piece of paper.
Which is what I kind of feel like I did. I mean, I'm cramming in information the night before an exam, like when I was in school, and I mean, I don't remember it now, so this isn't really working it. But I mean, yeah, I think education in some respects has to change along with what you're saying, because I think it's important for kids to know why they're learning something. I mean, a lot of the times, if you ask a child why they're doing algebra, they'll be like, "Oh, well, I don't even need it in the future. I don't know why I'm doing it." And it's remarkable. I mean, they should be taught why, or make things that are relevant to them, or like they feel like they've got some purpose or direction to work towards. I mean, talk to me about the last 9 months. Then, I mean, how difficult has it been being a head teacher in Japan in sort of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be the anomaly on your group here, because it actually hasn't been so bad. So it's actually been quite, obviously we had our teething problems with it, and I think when COVID first hit, we didn't really understand the science behind it. So Japan, like every other country, February 28th, March 1st said everyone's closing their doors. So we closed and we went to online learning literally the next day. We learned a lot through that process, because I think one of the things that I noticed with online learning is we all know about Zoom fatigue, right? I mean, you probably have it, I have it all the time. And so this thing, you could do synchronous learning online with kids for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That didn't last very long. So we realized that the best way to approach online learning was a nice blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning. So you would, you'd meet up with your teachers, you do something, and then you'd get something and you'd go away with it. And then you'd meet up with your teachers a little while later and they would talk about what you had been working on and what you had been doing and so on. So we also realized that an 8-hour day is quite a long day. So we actually cut back on the amount of time. We were only about 4 or 5 hours a day. And we were telling kids, learn something new, learn how to cook something, learn how to do, I think that was one of the advantages, as I keep hearing on your show, of COVID, is that people started to pick up some skills that maybe they never would have actually had a chance to do and spend more time with family and so on. So in that sense, it wasn't challenging. It was, we had our challenge and I think we overcame them. I think one of the things, again, that we had a great advantage of, and I hear it on your show a lot, is that, obviously being at an international school, we are a private school. All of our families are quite, not if they're not wealthy, they're still very well off. So for the fact that, our students did have the opportunity to have a device to do some learning, everyone had internet at home. So I can imagine, I hear some of the people, and that would be such a struggle that, how do you help these, underserviced families be able to have access to education? So we didn't have that struggle either.
Yeah, I mean, you were very lucky. Obviously, you've heard some of the stories on my podcast and some of the kids. I mean, in the UK, they've got the one school that needed 200 laptops for 200 deprived children, and they only got 11 from the government. I mean, there's a massive budget deficit in schools in general, and obviously they didn't get enough support. And it's a shame, isn't it? Because obviously these children are the future of the world, aren't they? They're the future doctors, the future lawyers, the future prime ministers, accountants. And we kind of need to give them the opportunities. And it's a shame because I feel like the gap between the advantage and disadvantage keeps growing bigger, and the COVID has just highlighted that massively. But
I think another. No, sorry. I was just going to say, I think another advantage we had was that, within our parent body, we do have some experts too, right? I mean, when one of our parents is actually a pediatrician who specializes in infectious diseases in children, who works for Doctors Without Borders. So literally, I had that medical reference to go to immediately. I would say, hey, what do you think about this? And then as the data started to come out and show that, especially younger children were less susceptible to COVID, she did a whole presentation, an online presentation to our parent community. And that really put our parents at ease to say, okay, yeah, school is the best place for our kids. And, unlike influenza and some other things, schools are not the breeding ground of this disease. Schools are actually, if you wear masks and you wash hands and you do all the protocols, they are very safe places, and the kids should be in school. So that was nice.
Yeah, for sure. Was it quite scary? Obviously, China, it originated from China, COVID, didn't it? And you're obviously a neighboring country. I mean, how scary was that when you first heard the news?
Yeah, a little bit, but having, I think I had the advantage of, even though I was new to the school, I mean, last year was my first year as head of the school, right? So it was like, wow, but having the advantage of having lived in Japan previously and knowing the country, in all honesty, I knew that Japan was, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to come to Japan, but, everything is sparkling clean. Everyone's wearing masks as soon as October rolls around anyway, because they don't want to. The idea in Japan is you always protect the other person. So if I'm feeling sick, I wear a mask. Masks have been, they're nothing unusual here in the country. So it was a little scary, and it started to, it was something, obviously we were concerned about it coming in from China, but I just had a sense that the Japanese population would do the right thing and we'd keep it under control. So.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, what do you think the future of education looks like? Obviously, with everything that's happened this year, I can imagine that there's certain things that you wouldn't go back to. I mean, what does it look like for you going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of changes, and I think COVID, as bad as it has been, and I've heard it from some of the other educators, there have been some good things that have come out of it. And a good friend of mine, James McDonald, who's now the head of Brussels, he wrote an article called "The 10 Virtues of the Virtual." And, and yeah, there was a lot of things in there. I mean, kids had to learn some resilience. Kids had to learn the kids had to learn how to be creative. And there were several things that we got out of it. What I see the future of education being is, I think one of the things I loved about, I am anti-exam. So I was really glad when all of the exams got canceled. And I'm hoping that will be a trend moving into the future, because as an educator, I don't understand if part of our job is preparing kids for the future. I don't know when in a working situation you put a kid in a room all by themselves, they can't speak to anybody, they can't use any resources, and they have to remember everything they've learned over the last year or two and put it down on a piece of paper. So yeah, I would love to see education move into a more collaborative project-based type assessments, as opposed to, really high stakes exams assessments. I think that would be a big step forward for education.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some respects, I agree. I think exams a little bit dated, aren't they? I mean, if you look at sort of the last 30 to 50 years, I mean, you've always had exams, but with times and the industry changing in the world, the exams, I don't personally think they always reflect like someone's ability to do well in a particular job. I mean, I went to the university, whatever, but it didn't actually have any relevance to what I'm doing now, and there's people with degrees that are doing something similar to me that probably aren't doing as well or whatever. I mean, it just very much depends on you, like as an individual, doesn't it? And I think, yeah, like if there was more things that were more practical, or they could actually speak. Some people are better at speaking than writing things down, aren't they? And sometimes I feel like the people that do really well in exams aren't always the best suited for the job, because they have no interpersonal skills, So it doesn't always show like, or give a true reflection on a person's ability. I mean, I know you said group assessments, but I mean, what would that entail? Like, what do you think the exam style needs to change to?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think you hit it. I think, we've been so focused in education for such a long time on what we call, academic ability. And I still, there is definitely, I'm not saying that we should just throw academics out of education. There's a high value on having knowledge and learning all of these skills that come along with academics. But I do, interpersonal skills, as you said. I mean, if you talk to any one of the employers out there, they say that the thing that's missing from young people coming out of schools, in particular universities, are those interpersonal skills. And if I think we should be teaching kids leadership. I mean, here's an example we have at our school, that we have this, in our middle school, we have something called advisory. And I just said immediately when I got to the school, well, I want a piece of that. So with the 6th grade, I teach a 5-week mini unit on grit. So they learn, I mean, it's all about perseverance and resilience. Grade 7, I do a mini unit on justice. You guys, we have a lot of diplomats kids. We have a lot of these people who are going to be future world leaders. When you get out in the world, it's your responsibility to make sure that there's justice for all and that everybody gets a fair shake. And then in grade 8, I do one on leadership. We only go up to 8th grade, so you guys are the oldest ones in our school. So we're going to talk about leadership. I'm going to give you some strategies, and then I expect you to take action and go out there and be the leaders of the school. And interestingly enough, with that group, because in one of the big catchphrases in education right now is called agency, and letting students be creative and take their own action. So I got a group of students together and said, our school has a really strong mission, has a really strong vision, but we don't have a set of values. We use the IB learner profile. We do anything, what 3 words encapsulate us as a school? And this group of leaders went around, they talked to people, they did some things, and now our school has these 3 words that have little definitions around them that are going to guide us moving forward. And I think that's allowing students to have that say and take that leadership in, a really important thing, and what's going to drive our school potentially for years to come is really important in education.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, like COVID has kind of been a blessing in disguise, hasn't it? Like it's kind of opened a lot of educators' eyes, and I feel like in some respects in the UK, there's a lot of people that kind of want to move away from the traditional systems, and they want to like have the flexibility to work on what's best for their children. And obviously, you may have seen in some of the podcasts, but out in the UK, we have a very generalised system. Like we have a system that kind of is catered, it's not catered for all, like it's kind of generalized throughout the UK, and there's people that are competing in rural areas to people that are in inner city London, and it's obviously a complete. I mean, you're not going to get the best out of these children because you don't really know them, and you're not doing what's best for them and tailoring the education based on them. And I think what's quite nice about what you've said is that you have the flexibility to tailor it to your students. And I mean, how much of a difference do you think that makes for your students?
Oh, I think it makes a world of difference. I mean, like I said, everything that, the only decisions we have to make are, is this really beneficial to student learning? We don't have to worry about whether it's going to meet, some type of standardized test, or whether it's going to do, meet this specific standard that the government has given us as part of our accreditation process. It really just leads us to be able to lead, everything focused, the student always at the center, everything focused around learning. And I think that's another thing I would like to, hopefully COVID, is when you talk about school accreditations, when you talk about inspections and rating these schools from great to bad, I really struggle with that idea as well. I mean, why would you not just go into a school and say, here are some things you're doing really well, here are some things that we have identified that maybe you could work on. But I think a lot of the process needs to be, and we've actually just changed we had a teacher appraisal system, but I've done a lot of work with some of my fellow heads, international school heads, and we're trying to move, we don't call it an appraisal system anymore, we call it a teacher self-reflection process. So literally, our teachers go through this self-reflection process and they get student feedback. They do surveys with the students. How's it going in class? What do you like? What don't you like? What could be better? All these kind of things. And that in itself, I think, leads to good practice, as opposed to someone coming in from the government with a clipboard and a checklist to say, yeah, you're doing that, you're not doing that. So I'm hoping, because a lot of these inspections haven't been able to happen because of COVID, maybe the people can find an alternative to that.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, I doubt it. I mean, is too highly regarded, unfortunately, in this country, and I think we are past the days. Like, I mean, it's not just yourself, but leaderboards in schools. I mean, all you're going to do is like put the really tough schools, the schools that are struggling. You're going to make it even more difficult for them to get better, because nobody wants to work there, nobody wants to send their children there. No, do you know what I mean? And it's making things a lot more difficult for certain schools. And obviously, we want everyone to improve, don't we? We want the disadvantaged children to have a chance.
We would never label a child, you know what I mean? I don't understand why you would label a school. We would never label a child, well, you're no good, you can't do anything for the rest. I mean, we've understood how wrong that is, and we've understood how wrong traditional education has been in that case too, because, as you said, if you did really well in exams, you were a good student, and if you didn't do well in exams, you weren't a good student. Well, maybe that student had a really creative aspect, and we know that, for lack of a better term, people who've gone out there and been highly successful, a lot of times their educational, their education prospectus, or whatever you want to call it, they weren't the best student in the class. They actually just had a lot of other attributes there. So, I think you have to, like you do with students, and you try to find the good things and what they can, what they can excel in. I think you could do the same thing with schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what does it look for you then? I mean, what are your plans going forward?
Yeah, I think our plans going forward, again, one of the big initiatives that we started this year, and it's part of the International Baccalaureate, is something called service learning. So we are from our students we're from very privileged, I don't know, backgrounds, whatever you want to say. And we want our students to not just go out there and understand that there are these charities and there are these service, but actually learning what service is, why it's important, why, especially from their advantage background, why it's important that they go out there and do something and make a change. And so we basically put around a bunch of themes around our school and said, go gravitate under one of these themes and create a group and then come up with some ideas of what you want to do to take action around this. So we've got some really, I mean, some of them around gender equality, some of them around environmental issues, all these things. And our students are working and they're making plans on how they can go out and make a difference in the world.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
that's a big thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's obviously amazing. I mean, like it's quite nice to obviously like share your journey. I mean, you've obviously gone through quite a lot, and it's nice to see your perspective, because obviously when I speak to educators across the world, I mean, everyone's got their own views and their own opinions, and you can obviously take a lot of nuggets from what you've said. And I think in the UK, I do feel like the system does need to change just a little bit. I mean, what do you think needs to be done? I mean, obviously just as a whole in the country, like where does education need to go?
I think in every one of our countries that, you know, the people who lead education need to be educators. So if you're going to have, you know, an education secretary, that education secretary better have been, you know, gone through the ranks, been a teacher, probably moved up into some type of leadership role in education and understood it from all sides, so that they have, you know, they have a knowledgeable perspective, as opposed to just being someone who's I heard it on your podcast today, you know, is a lifetime politician. Those people shouldn't, I wouldn't want those people to also be, you know, the head of the health organization. I want that person to have been a doctor, or, you know, gone through the health ranks, as opposed to just being a minister. So I think it's really important that when we put people, you know, when governments put people into positions of responsibility, that they make sure that those people actually have gone through it, lived it, and know what they're talking about, so they can make the best judgments for people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, again, we're probably a long way from that, because in the UK, we have an 18 to 24 month kind of lifespan for an education secretary, and they kind of move on to the next kind of whatever cycle they are in politics. And I mean, it's a shame, because, yeah, they don't know what's best for the schools. And I think overall, you need a unanimous educator that is going to be the education secretary, like you said. And it's so important, because we want to do what's best for these kids and the future of our economy. And we've got to get the right people in to make the right decisions, you know. And I think that's so important to the future of education.
Well, and that's why I take my hat off to all the educators who are out there in the public systems around the world. I mean, I at sometimes feel guilty, because I have had a relatively easy path in education, and, you know, I have been in really good schools, and I mean, I've learned a lot, and I try to do what I can for my group of kids, but I really take my hat off for those educators who are so dedicated to kids. And even when they totally disagree with what's going on around them and things that are being pushed on them, they just kind of grin and bear it, and they know that what they're doing is great for kids, and they just continue on with it. So, yeah, and I always look, I mean, I heard on your show that I was listening to today, but I always look for those type of educators too. If someone wants to work in our school who has gone through the ranks and has, you know, worked at places that were relatively tough and knows about kids, then, yeah, I have a deep admiration for them. So.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, actually, what kind of things do you look for, and what kind of traits do you look for in teachers to take them on in your school?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you have to be a good teacher, but first and foremost, you just have to be a good person. I mean, we all know that teachers are such a huge role model for kids. Like I said, I became a teacher because my teachers were such fantastic people, and they were great role models to me. So first and foremost, I just look, you've got to be a good person. And I go back to, you know, the head that I got hired with in Yokohama. When he would go out hiring, he said, "I'm going to bring back a few good eggs." And I've never forgot that, because it's totally true. You need to bring back people who are, you know, committed to kids, committed to teaching, but are also enjoy being around children and want to do things with them, and you know, put a real passion out there that people can follow. So I really look for those type of educators that just, you know, are passionate about education, passionate about kids, you know, are just kind, empathetic style people that can be a real role model for kids, is first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did you find it that much more difficult to recruit this year? I don't know what your recruitment was like this year, but if you needed people, do you find it was harder to attract people to come over to Japan?
Yeah, no, actually. I mean, I think, again, because you know, in the grand scheme of how things are going in the world, COVID-19, it hasn't been as bad here as it has been in many countries. So Japan is actually quite an attractive place for teachers to want to come to. So that hasn't been a difficulty. And, I think Japan is one of those countries that's highly rated on people's radar for just wanting to live in for a few years. It's really exotic. It's really safe. There's lots of things about it. So that hasn't been an issue. I think one of the things, it has been a little bit more difficult to retain people, to tell you the truth, because, one of the problems of living and working overseas is some of our teachers haven't seen their family in 2 years. They couldn't go home this summer because if they left, they couldn't get back into the country.
Sure.
So we have a higher turnover this year probably than we've ever had. And literally it's just because people feel like they need to go back and be around their family. And some of them have obviously had, quite difficulties, quite serious health conditions happen in their family, and they weren't able to be there when they really needed to be. So it's been more of the retaining as opposed to the recruiting of people. It's been been more of a struggle.
Yeah, fair enough. And what about like the students? Because obviously you have to recruit students as well, don't you? For you to kind of make sure that you're staying alive as a school, you've got to make sure that kids go there. I mean, was it more difficult this year to try and attract students to come over to the international school?
Yeah, I mean, I think again we're very lucky in our position that we're a well-recognized IB school that's well-recognized by parents. We have something called the Readers Writers Workshop out of Columbia University. It's a literacy program that's literally, getting really popular in international schools worldwide. We're one of only 5 schools that have what's called project status that's been recognized outside the United States as being one of these leaders in the program. So because we have this really good reputation, we've actually been quite lucky in keeping. Now, some of the other schools that are, and we're quite well established, some of the schools that aren't quite as well established, they've really struggled because obviously companies are bringing their expats home and all those kind of things. So I do feel for some of my international educator colleagues who, I mean, we just heard about a school literally last week that's going to close, that's not far away from us. It's been a real struggle for them. So yeah, my heart goes out to all those guys because it is tough times.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, sorry to hear that about that other school, but it's one of those times, isn't it? I mean, this year's been quite tough on a lot of people. But I mean, obviously, the reason why I wanted to do this podcast was to celebrate the things teachers are doing and educators across the world are doing. And one of the amazing things that you obviously spoke to me just before we started recording was one of the things that you do as a school is build schools, don't you? And then that is part of your program. I mean, can you just tell us about the amazing stuff that you've done there?
Yeah, so we have this school in Cambodia. It's called, so we're TIS, so Tokyo International School. And we have a TIS Cambodia school, but it's called the Tokyo Inspired School. So it was inspired out of our school. I think, as I said, we're very privileged in where we are. And this was actually started, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it, but remarkably, this was actually started by our parents. Our parents, a lot of them are into philanthropy, and they started this school and we kind of took it over from them. And yeah, I mean, it's a school that's in Cambodia. It's in a place that is struggling financially. So we pay for teachers and we pay for a lot of the upkeep. We just sent some money over because the girls don't have anywhere to change for PE class. So they said, we need this much money to be able to build curtains so the girls can change before PE, and said, it's all yours, away we go. So and how we actually partly fund this is we have a group at our school called Kids for Kids, and Kids for Kids do all of the fundraising ideas are created and decided by the students, and then they raise money and then they send it over to the students in Cambodia as a fundraiser. So they went out when they saw this, they're like, okay, we need this much money. Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? They raise money and they send it over as quickly as possible. And now the girls have a place to change so they can change before they have to go to PE class, which is quite nice.
Remarkable. I mean, you did some amazing stuff with your children, because to get them involved and get them to think about doing charitable work at such a young age, it's phenomenal. I mean, hopefully that only is going to to guide them to do better when they're older, and I think it's such an important thing to learn from a young age. So, I mean, you're doing an amazing job over there. I mean, we've obviously gone through quite a lot, and I don't want to keep you too long, but is there anything that you want to go through just before we end the podcast today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think, one of the things I think we need to do as educators, and one of the things I think we do really well here in Japan in our international schools, we're a group of 28 schools. It's called the Japan Council of International Schools. And it's just been such a benefit to, we all know about collective intelligence. I mean, the more people you put in the room, just the better ideas you're going to come up with. And so I think as educators, we need to build those networks, and, and I think we need to reach out to one another and just really support one another. And knowing that, anybody out there who is struggling for ideas and would like any help, my door is always open. I accept absolutely everyone on LinkedIn. I think you should, as someone in our position where maybe we do have the opportunity to help out to people. And I just think we try to build our network and support one another as much as possible, because inevitably every one of us in education are just out there to try to help kids. So if I can help one of my kids, or we can help one of your kids, it's just helping a kid. That's what we're all about.
Absolutely. And obviously educators have been remarkable this year, and it is about supporting each other, because unfortunately we might not get it necessarily from anywhere else, and maybe not from our governments or whatever, but ultimately teachers you don't get into teaching for money, you get to do it to make a difference to these kids, don't you? And as a community, I feel like you've been so amazing, and again, like this what this podcast is all about, is to thank all the teachers out there and all the school staff for putting themselves on the front line, but also doing what they can for these children. And obviously my hat goes off to all of you, and I can't thank you enough. And Daniel, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your wisdom and giving us some nuggets today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
No, thanks, TJ. And it was the pleasure was mine. And keep up your show. It's fantastic. I'm enjoying every episode so far. So. Fantastic.
And obviously keep up the good work. Obviously you're doing remarkable stuff out there. So I mean, when this COVID system all goes down, I want to come down and meet you in Tokyo.
You come to Tokyo and I will show you around. There's absolutely that's a guarantee.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to take you up on that.
Well, please do. Please.
We'll leave it there, Dan. I know you've got some recruiting to do, so I'm gonna end the podcast for today. But thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Best of luck, and best of luck to all you educators out there.
Thanks.